Thank you, Senator Cruz. All right, we're going to move on to national security here, and we are going to I want to read a quote from Secretary Robert Gates, former Defense Secretary Robert Gates, who served for under 8 presidents. And this is what he said about Republican candidates. Quote, "Part of the concern that I have with the campaign is that the solutions being offered are so simplistic and so at odds with the way the world really works." So in that spirit, we're going to work tonight to be more specific. Mr. Trump, I want to start with you. You've said it as president, you'll get up to speed very quickly. You'll know more quickly as president than any of the experts. So you've been elected president. It's your first day in the Situation Room. What 3 questions do you ask your national security experts about the world?
What we want to do, when we want to do it, and how hard do we want to hit? Because we are going to have to hit very, very hard to knock out ISIS. We're going to also have to learn who our allies are. We have allies, so-called allies. We're spending billions and billions of dollars supporting people. We have no idea who they are in Syria. Do we want to stay that route, or do we want to go and make something with Russia? I hate to say Iran, but with Russia, because we made in the Iran deal, it's one of the worst deals I've ever seen negotiated in my entire life. It's a disgrace that this country negotiated that deal. But very important, not only a disgrace, it's a disgrace and an embarrassment, but very important, who are we fighting with? Who are we fighting for? What are we doing? We have to rebuild our country, but we have to. I'm the only one on the stage that said, do not go into Iraq. Do not attack Iraq. Nobody else on this stage said that, and I said it loud and strong. And I was in the private sector. I wasn't a politician, fortunately. But I said it, and I said it loud and clear. You'll destabilize the Middle East. That's exactly what happened. I also said, by the way, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, attack the oil. Take the wealth away. Attack the oil and keep the oil. They didn't listen. They just started that a few months ago.
Senator Rubio. Just 30 seconds on this question, Senator Rubio. Are those the questions you would ask?
No, I think there are 3 major threats that you want to immediately get on top of. Number 1 is, what are we doing in the Asia-Pacific region, where both North Korea and China pose threats to the national security of the United States? Number 2 is, what are we doing in the Middle East with a combination of the Sunni-Shia conflict driven by the Shia arc that Iran is now trying to establish in the Middle East, and also the growing threat of ISIS? And the third is rebuilding and reinvigorating NATO in the European theater, particularly in Central Europe and in Eastern Europe, where Vladimir Putin is now threatening the territory of multiple countries, already controls 20% of Georgia and a significant percentage of Ukraine.
Let me ask you a follow-up, a full, proper question. Violent extremists are active in 40 countries. Some 80 countries are in different degrees of instability, and so that's just the crises overseas. Barack Obama walked into an economic collapse when he came into office. We face international health crises, from Ebola to Zika. So there's a lot of opportunity for crisis, as you've talked about. What would you point to in your past to show voters that you've been in a crisis and that you've been tested when that inevitable crisis comes when you're president?
Let me just tell you what's happened a couple years ago. One of the hardest decisions you'll ever make in Congress is when you are asked by the president to authorize the use of force in a conflict, because you are now putting your name on behalf of the people of your state behind a military action where Americans in uniform could lose their life. So in 2014, Barack Obama said he would not take military action against Assad unless it was authorized by the Senate, beginning on the Committee of Foreign Relations, where I am one of its members. And it was hard, because you looked at the pictures. I saw the same images people saw. I'm the father of children. I saw the images of these little children been gassed and poisoned by their own leaders. And we were angry. Something had to happen, and there was the sense that we needed to seek retribution. And then I looked at Barack Obama's plan. Barack Obama's plan, which John Kerry later described as unbelievably small, and I concluded that that attack would not only not help the situation, it would make it actually worse. It would allow Assad to stand up to the United States of America, survive a strike, stay in power, and actually strengthen his grip. And so it was a difficult decision to make. And when we only had a few days to look at and make a decision on, and I voted against Barack Obama's plan to use force, and it was the right decision.
Dr. Carson, I want to ask you a question. Dr. Carson, you've said you've had more 2 a.m. phone calls than anybody up on this stage. But when those 2 a.m. phone calls came, you operated on a foundation of all of that amazing medical work that you did, all of that learning. So if you were to be president, though, you wouldn't have the political foundation that hones those instincts when the 2 a.m. phone call comes. So isn't that a liability?
No, it isn't. First of all, let me go back to your first question for me. It wasn't phrased as who gets to nominate Supreme Court appointees. Of course, that's the president. So I know that there's some left-wing media who would try to make hay on that. Secondly, thank you for including me in the debate. 2 questions already. This is great. Now, as far as those 2 a.m. phone calls are concerned, judgment is what is required. And the kinds of things that you come up with are sometimes very, very difficult and very unique. One of the things that I was known for is doing things that have not been done before. So no amount of experience really prepares you to do something that has never been done before. That's where judgment comes in. And that, I think, is a situation that we're in right now, a situation that we have never been in before with the kinds of threats that pose real danger to our nation. And it comes in very handy in those situations.
Governor Kasich, Russia is being credited with bombing U.S.-backed rebels on behalf of Assad in Aleppo in Syria. They've also moved into the Crimea, eastern Ukraine. You said you want to punch them in the nose. What does that mean? What are you going to do?
First of all, look, we have to make it clear to Russia what we expect. We don't have to declare an enemy or rattle a sword or threaten, but we need to make it clear what we expect. Number one is we will arm the folks in Ukraine who are fighting for their freedom. They deserve it. There'll be no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Secondly, an attack on NATO trumped up on any excuse of Russian-speaking people, either in the NATO countries or in Finland or Sweden, is going to be an attack on us. And look, I think we have an opportunity as America to put something really great together again. The Egyptians, the Saudis, the Jordanians, the Gulf states, they all know they're at risk. When we look into Europe, we look at France, we look at Germany and the migrants, we look at Belgium, we look at Britain. Everybody now is being threatened by radical Islam. We have an opportunity to lead. You know, the fact of the matter is the world is desperate for our leadership. Sometimes they may make a remark here or there that we don't like, but frankly, the world needs us, and we have an opportunity now to assemble a coalition of the civilized people, those who respect civilization, the rights of women, the rights to protest, to be able to reassert our leadership all across this globe again and make sure this century is going to be the best we've ever seen.
Governor Bush,
Yep.
You said defeating ISIS requires defeating Assad, but wouldn't that also put us into conflict with Russia, a country that supports Assad? So doesn't that mean effectively Assad's there to stay?
No, it doesn't. And that's the problem. The lack of leadership in this country by Barack Obama, John Kerry, Hillary Clinton, thinking that this is a policy that works, this policy of containment with ISIS, it's a complete unmitigated disaster. And to allow Russia now to have influence in Syria makes it harder. But we need to destroy ISIS and dispose of Assad to create a stable Syria so that the 4 million refugees aren't a breeding ground for Islamic jihadists. This is the problem. Donald Trump brought up the fact that he would want to accommodate Russia. Russia is not taking out ISIS. They're attacking our team, the team that we've been training and the team that we've been supporting. It is absolutely ludicrous to suggest that Russia could be a positive partner in this. They are on the run. They are making, every time we step back, they're on the run. The question that you asked was a really good one about what you would do. What 3 things would you do? I would restore the military. The sequester needs to be reversed. I would have a strategy to destroy ISIS. And I would immediately create a policy of containment as it relates to Iran's ambitions and to make clear that we are not going to allow for Iran to do what it's doing, which is to move towards a nuclear weapon. Those 3 things would be the first and foremost things that we need to do in 2017.
Mr. Trump, you were mentioned here. You did say you could get along very well with Vladimir Putin. You did at one point say let Russia take care of ISIS.
Call me a genius. I like him so far, I have to tell you. Let me just tell you this. Jeb is so wrong. Jeb is absolutely so. That's just so you understand. You know what that is? That's Jeb's special interest in lobbyists talking. Look, let me just tell you something. Jeb is so wrong. You got to fight ISIS first. You fight ISIS first. Right now you have Russia, you have Iran, you have them with Assad, and you have them with Syria. You have to knock out ISIS. They're chopping off heads. These are animals. You have to knock them out. You have to knock them off strong. You decide what to do after. You can't fight two wars at one time. If you listen to him and you listen to some of the folks that I've been listening to, that's why we've been in the Middle East for 15 years and we haven't won anything. We've spent $5 trillion in the Middle East because of thinking like that. We've spent and Lindsey Graham, who backs him, who had 0 on his polls. So let me just tell you something. We've spent. I only tell the truth, lobbyists. We've spent $5 trillion all over the middle. We have to rebuild our country. We have to rebuild our infrastructure. You listen to that, you're going to be there for another 15 years.
All right, Governor Bush, please respond.
So the very basic fact is that Vladimir Putin is not going to be an ally of the United States. The whole world knows this. It's a simple, basic fact. They're not taking out. They're not even attempting to take out ISIS. They're attacking the troops that we're supporting. We need to create a coalition, Sunni-led coalition, on the ground with our special operators to destroy ISIS and bring about stability. And you can't do that with Assad in power.
We're supporting troops that we don't even know who they are.
Okay,
we're supporting troops that we don't even know who they are.
Trump. All right.
We have no idea who they are.
Gentlemen, I think we're gonna leave that there. I've got a question
from a guy
for Senator.
who gets his foreign policy from the shows.
Oh,
this is a guy who thinks that Hillary Clinton was a great negotiator in Iran. We're living in dangerous times.
In New Hampshire.
This is a man who insults his way to the nomination.
44 million.
All right, ladies. All right.
Give me a break.
Gentlemen, let's leave it there so I can ask a question of Senator Cruz, who's also running for president. Senator Cruz, you've talked about the first Gulf War as being a kind of model for your focused and determined effort to go after ISIS. But there were 700,000 ground troops as a part of that. So, and you don't have a ground component to your plan. Why?
Well, we need to focus on what the objective is. You know, your question about the first 3 questions you would ask in the Situation Room, I think it is a problem. If the President and Commander-in-Chief we've elected does not have the experience and background to understand the threats facing this country coming in on day one, if you look at the threats facing this country, the single gravest threat, national security threat, is the threat of a nuclear Iran. That's why I pledged on day one to rip to shreds this Iranian nuclear deal. And anyone that thinks you can negotiate with Khamenei does not understand the nature of Khamenei. When it comes to ISIS, we've got to have a focused objective. One of the problems of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton's foreign policy, and sadly, too many establishment Republicans in Washington, is they focus on issues unrelated to protecting this country. They focus on nation building. They focus on toppling governments to promote democracy, and it ends up undermining our national security. Now, with regard to ISIS, we need a commander-in-chief that sets the objective. We will utterly defeat them because they have declared war. They've declared jihad on us. Now, what do we need to carry that out? We need overwhelming air power. We need to arm the Kurds, who can be our boots on the ground. And if ground troops are necessary, then we should employ them. But it shouldn't be politicians demonstrating political toughness. It should be military expert judgment carrying out the objective set out by the Commander-in-Chief.
Just very quickly, 30-second follow-up. You've said that essentially the Kurds would be the American ground forces in there. The criticism that experts have on that is that the Kurds only can work within their territory. If they take larger amounts of territory, you have an ethnic war with the Arabs. So the Kurds can't really do as much as you seem to be putting on their backs.
We have Kurds in both Iraq and Syria. They are fighting ISIS right now. They are winning victories right now. ISIS is using American military equipment they've seized in Iraq. And the Obama administration refuses to arm the Kurds, the Peshmerga, the fighting forces who've been longtime allies. We ought to be arming them and letting them fight. Now, if we need to embed special forces to direct our overwhelming air power, if it is required to use ground troops to defeat ISIS, we should use them, but we ought to start with using our incredible air power advantage. The first Persian Gulf War, we launched 1,100 air attacks a day. Today, we're launching between 15 and 30. We're not using the tools we have, and it's because the Commander-in-Chief is not focused on defeating the enemy.
All right, Mr. Trump.